So a couple of weeks ago, Google officially launched the public release of Android 9.0 Pie, and within mere hours of Google's release, Essential surprised everyone by also releasing their own public update as well, which is absolutely crazy how fast they were. And I said to myself, it's time to finally test this controversial device. And so without further ado, here's everything new with this software update on the Essential phone. So first things first, the lock screen. It's not dramatically different from what we had on Oreo, but you might be able to notice the slight change in font for the date, which is now the new Google Sans font, but unfortunately it doesn't show the weather next to the date like it does on the Pixel devices. Aside from that, notifications on the lock screen are just slightly modified from the previous Oreo software in that they now sit in ever so subtly from the sides rather than pressing right up against the sides. If you have a pattern set up as your backup unlocking security method, then a slight change found here is that the line now fades away as you draw your pattern, which is a really subtle yet nice visual change in my opinion. So unlocking the device, and the first thing we'll take a look at is the new and updated notification shade, which sees quite a big visual overhaul compared to the previous updates. We still have that white background introduced with the Oreo update, but now all of our icons are sitting in their own little circle. And this definitely looks quite a bit different from what we've previously been used to, but I'm certainly enjoying the new look and appreciate this refreshed design. The icons themselves have also been updated. They now have what I would call a more youthful look to them rather than the industrial look of the previous design. And this certainly takes some getting used to, but I think I'm on board now that I've used it for a couple of weeks. Above the notification shade, you can see we now have a black bar, which the time and battery percentage sits on. And I think this is Google's method of dealing with the notch trend in a uniform way that will match across a large range of devices. Swiping the notification shade down a second time, there's nothing too different here. The animations and the functionality all remains fairly much the same, although we have lost the ability to interact with the quick toggles directly, and now it takes a long press to move into the expanded settings. And this does seem like an odd decision, but it is what it is, so it's something we'll all just have to get used to. The only other change worth mentioning here is that the brightness slider has had some changes made under the hood, which means that from 0 to about 75% on the slider itself, it feels as though there's only a small change in the brightness level of the display, and then you get a steep increase once you go beyond that 75% mark. It means that I'm sitting with my brightness slider at around 75 to 80% indoors all day because of this change, and whether this affects battery life, I'd be surprised if it did, but it is an odd change and seems to be a little bit counterintuitive. As for the status bar itself, you can now see that the clock has been moved over to the left. And again, this is all a part of Google embracing the notch so that there's more room up the top to fit each of our icons in. New or unread notifications will appear next to the clock, and that nice pop-in animation is still present here. It just moves over as you drag the notification shade down, and then as it did with Oreo, will expand as you reach the notification itself. As for our settings menu, this has been given a visual overhaul as well. We now have a much more vibrant look with each settings icon being updated with a colorful icon. And again, this was something I didn't love at first, but it has grown on me as time has passed. Now, probably the biggest change of them all is the new gesture navigation system. And this can be enabled by heading into the system settings, tapping on gestures, and then by enabling the swipe up on home button option. Now, really quickly, if you disable this, you can see we have our traditional navigation buttons still available, although they're now all filled in, unlike the Oreo and Nougat software in which they were outlines instead. And the first thing to mention here that I'm a bit disappointed by is that with either this setup or the gesture setup enabled, we no longer have that fancy home button animation, which was previously around on the Essential phone. And I know it seems petty, but I love that little animation, and I'm hoping Essential will reintroduce it in a future software update. But coming back to the gesture navigation setup, this works exactly how it does on the Pixel devices, in that tapping it will take us home, swiping up will launch into our overview screen, which is the new version of recent apps, and swiping a bit further, which is very clunky if you ask me, will take you into your app drawer from any screen. If you then swipe right and hold, this gives you the ability to quickly scan the last 6 applications that you've used and launch into any of them when you release. If you swipe right and don't hold, this acts as the quick switcher, switching between your 2 most recent apps, which is an awesome feature that I'm glad is still here with this navigation method. Although from time to time it will switch to my 3rd most recently used app, which is a bit annoying, and I think this could and should be refined in a software update. Aside from that, we still have a back button here, which is only visible when there's actually something to go back to. Obviously, it's also been redesigned as well, and it does the job just as you'd expect it to. Now, as for my thoughts on this gesture navigation setup, I actually quite like it for the most part, but there's a few really clunky aspects which I think a small selection of really simple changes could make all the difference to. So again, that long swipe up into the app drawer is, in my opinion, a bit unnecessary and just feels unpolished. And this isn't just on the Essential phone, but also on the Pixel devices too. To be honest with you, we've never complained about the fact that we can't swipe into the app drawer from anywhere but our home screen, and so I think removing this feature altogether would actually be of benefit. Just make it so that a swipe up takes us to the overview screen no matter how long or short, and then on our home screen, swiping up anywhere but on the home button will launch into the app drawer. At the moment, even on the home screen, you have to swipe precisely on the home button to get into the app drawer. Nowhere else on the home screen works, and this is very clunky and annoying and just seems, like I said, unnecessary. Aside from that, I also think that a swipe left on the home button should act as the back key, and having a dedicated back button isn't something we really need. Otherwise, we'd just revert back to the traditional navigation bar if we really wanted to. Finally, the swipe right and hold feature to switch between the 6 most recently used apps seems a little bit counterintuitive as well. It doesn't make sense that we're swiping right to get to the apps on the left, so I think that should also be fixed in a software update. Hopefully what we have right now is just Google easing us into the navigation system, and like I said, in a future update, whether it's 9.1 or even something earlier, perhaps these issues will be resolved. The only other feature to talk about in regards to the navigation area is obviously the new rotation suggestion feature, which basically means you can keep your device rotation locked to portrait, and whenever you rotate your device, a little button appears that when tapping on it will manually rotate and lock your phone's orientation. A very simple but awesome feature that I think deserves a lot of props. Now, aside from that, the Homescreen Launcher is very similar, if not exactly the same compared to what we had on previous Essential software iterations. Although one thing to keep in mind is that if you decide to use a third-party launcher, swiping into the overview screen will no longer show the quick launch app icons at the bottom, and you also won't be able to launch into the app drawer via a swipe up either. These features are obviously integrated into the Homescreen Launcher itself, which is a bit of a bummer, but to be honest, I'm still using a third-party launcher and I haven't been overly bothered by the lack of these features regardless. We also now have a slightly updated power menu, which adds in the option to take a screenshot, which is helpful if you don't quite have the dexterity or the hands available to hit both the power and the volume keys at the same time, which does happen from time to time. The volume slider, as I'm sure you've all seen by now, has also been updated both in its look and in its functionality. It's obviously a lot smaller and off to the side, which I really like, and it now automatically by default controls the media volume. We also have the ability to quickly toggle and cycle between volume profiles by tapping the button at the top there, and if you do want to change the other volume sliders, then you do so by tapping on the settings toggle at the bottom and by manually doing so there. And then aside from that, the only other new features to make mention of include the new battery manager found in the settings menu. It's just a more advanced and efficient way of detecting applications that are consuming more battery than they perhaps should, although I haven't been experiencing phenomenal battery life with this update, about 4 hours of screen on time, and yet no applications have appeared in this battery manager, so it really hasn't been of much use to me at this point in time. And then finally, whilst it's not new, the Ambient Display feature has been slightly updated in that it has the battery percentage at the bottom, and you can now double tap to interact with and wake up the screen. But anyway, that is about it for all of the new features that have come packed into this update on the Essential phone. And overall, I'm really enjoying all of the new upgrades that have come with this new software update. And I'm fascinated to see what Google has in store for the next software updates, because Android just keeps getting more and more refined. But that is it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And if you did, a thumbs up would be very much appreciated. But aside from that, thank you guys very much for watching, and I will catch you later.